Welcome to another episode of the Phoenix Mystery School podcast. I am Cassandra Finch, and this podcast today is going to be about a collective reading for September, October, November, just some general themes that you might be experiencing during those months, and also what to look for during those months to help enhance your growth and whatever it is that you are accomplishing in that time. Starting with September. September is a very interesting month because we are coming to the end of summer season. Everything seems to go back to a specific set routine, and this will be the time as well to know that the theme for this is you are not alone. And in this theme, we talk about isolation for the month of September. If there's anywhere that you've been isolating yourself, anywhere that you haven't been fully engaging with a sense of community, anywhere where you've gone too internal for too long of a period of time. So for everyone, this is going to be just a little bit different based on how you are. But if you are more of an internal person and you need more time to yourself, you also need to remind yourself that once in a while, you do need those interactions. You do need to get out of your space, out of your sanctuary, your bubble, and actually look to the world for what it is that you might want to step into next. So this would be the perfect time to do that, to address what have I manifested recently? How long have I been enjoying this and being in the comfort of this? And what is truly next for me? Get in with your sense of community. I am an internal person as well, but I also know that I do need a strong support structure. I do need a sense of community, and I do need to reach out to people once in a while. You can't just always be in your own inner world. And that being said, even though you might have your own inner world, how you find what community suits you best is by how you feel in that community. Do you feel seen? Do you feel heard? Do you feel respected? Do you feel valued? Sometimes, well, I won't say sometimes. It's more all the time. If you are an internal person, you're noticing consistently that people aren't valuing you or respecting you, you've got to change your internal game. You've got to change how you talk about yourself, how you feel about yourself. And then you'll start to notice that shift and change, but only when you see that as a pattern in your life. If it's a one-off thing, it's a one-off thing, right? But if it's something that's consistently happening, then you have to ask, where am I not honoring myself, respecting myself, loving myself, valuing myself? And especially if you're an entrepreneur like me, it is very important as an internal person that you value yourself and the work that you put out into the world for others to see the value and want to actually engage in your work. Now, if you're an external person, it's going to be the opposite. As an external person, if you are isolating majority of the time, you are cutting yourself off from experiencing your divinity, because how you're going to experience it is in conversation with other people, is in connection with other people. Whether they are like you or not, it really depends on the kind of person that you are. But often you will experience so much more inspiration and ahas through your sense of community. So it's a reminder that regardless of what you're going through, it's important to stay engaged and stay engaged in those communities that respect and value, right? I will always bring it back to that. Even though some people learn by being around others who are very, very different, that doesn't mean that respect goes out the window, okay? Especially in the online world. And as an external person, you need physical, real life interaction, okay? So you need to get out of what isolation cycle. If you're feeling stuck or stagnant, ask yourself, when was the last time I actually got out doing something that I really enjoy, that makes me feel good with people, and to get out of whatever slump it is that you're in? It's very important to take notice. And the other piece to this is, if you're too much in other people's lives and worlds, even as an external person, you can't get too caught up in the lives of others. because otherwise it'll just be a complete distraction from who you are. And it's avoidance. And we all have avoidance patterns. As an internal person, my avoidance is avoiding how I feel inside. And for me, what I used to do is place blame externally instead of taking responsibility. So I bring these as reminders because as you get out of isolation, as you get into physical connection, as you get into community, it's going to be really important to take these things into consideration. But if you are an internal person like me, physical connection is great, but make sure you are balanced. They are not spending all your time with other people and not taking time to reflect on how do you feel in these situations? How do you feel in your life? How do you feel about yourself right now? Very important questions to ask. And as an internal person, I used to really act extroverted. I used to spend most of my time with other people, so I didn't have to deal with my internal feelings. So I didn't have to go inward. So this could be the opposite of how, as an internal person, rather than isolation, you might spend too much time in circles with other people, too much time with other people, not enough time for yourself. So as we end the isolation, it's about creating balance, not going from one extreme of the pendulum to the next, but really coming into deep sense of connection. Those who understand the kind of person you are, those that see your divinity, and also you seeing your own divinity, being able to see that in others, but also make sure that if you're on this path, that you're choosing to surround yourself with people who are choosing themselves. You don't have to change anyone. You don't have to make them anyone that they're not. But just remember, it's going to be very depleting to be around people as you make these changes who do not see themselves and just want others to reaffirm who they are all the time without them taking any sort of accountability for their own divinity, without them choosing it. It's so great when other people see it. But again, because I've done this in the past, if you're not choosing it and you're only being around people to help lift you up, that's not a healthy pattern to be in. So just be aware of doing that. Be aware of those also in your environment who might do that. And it doesn't mean you have to cut them off. It's a simple conversation, right? Around what it is that they're choosing for themselves. How can you just lovingly guide them to choosing themselves and seeing themselves? Some people refuse to. They refuse to see their gifts. And that's okay. You can love them, see them, but also you can't force. You can inspire, but that's as far as you can with that. So one thing around September as well, other than getting out of the isolation, is also to align with your dreams and your vision and to be fully present in your physical body so you can actualize ideas and so you can actually move forward. Remember that as you get out of isolation, be grounded. Have your sanctuary, your peace. And when you ground even further, you can go higher into your gifts, into your divinity. So getting out of isolation, getting with community, but staying grounded in the physical essence, especially when you are a spiritual entrepreneur, especially when you are choosing your divinity. And that looks different for everyone because, again, spiritual paths look differently. You don't have to be into the energy field. You don't have to read oracle cards to be spiritual. You don't have to have crystals to be spiritual, But as you choose more positive choices, keep it grounded in physical reality. It's so easy to go off into the astral planes and do all these things, but if you're not grounding it into the physical and making those physical connections, it can be similar to escapism. So, for example, if you are setting solid boundaries in the physical, make sure you do in the spiritual and vice versa. If there's anything that you're avoiding in the spiritual, say the fear of the unknown, what are you also avoiding in the physical that is very similar? It's just important to have a look at these pieces. Because what I've noticed is that the spiritual often reflects the physical. when people are dealing with a whole bunch of spiritual attachments and entities and things like that, there's a lot of that happening on the physical realm. There's attachments to what they think they have to be to others, people pleasing, giving their energy up, that sort of thing, in order to stay safe and conflict free. And sometimes it's the opposite, where people are pleasing them in order to keep the peace or whatever the case may be. But either way, there's very similar attachments. And remember, none of us are perfect. We all do these things. All of us at some point have. So keep that in mind, stay grounded, get into your community, get in physical connection with others, and really ground your values, your beliefs, really ground your principles. So there's going to be some interesting aspects for October as well, because October represents the severing of anything that is misaligned. So as you align with your goals in September, as you align with your sense of community, you will probably start to realize what bonds you need to sever. The severance of bonds doesn't mean anyone is right or wrong. It just could mean that you're on very different paths, or how you came together and how you related to each other has changed. So you're going to need a period of breaking that bond, taking time apart, whatever the case may be. It's just taking that time so you can either repair in the future, if repair isn't possible now. Sometimes they will come back around, sometimes they will not. And that's okay, because alignment is more important than anything else. Being true to yourself is going to be the most important thing as you start to move forward. And because we constantly evolve and change, there's going to be times where we think things are aligned and they're not. And sometimes we need space to gain clarity. Sometimes we need space to create something new, a new foundation. Sometimes this comes through anger and conflict. Noticing what aspects where you've either let someone down or you've been let down. Always look on both spectrums, because what I have noticed, we all come from what's happening to us versus how we are also responding and acting to others. So if you're noticing you're being let down, then ask, is there anywhere where I'm letting others down? And in October, there's this very strong Mars energy. And to me, Mars energy is not really, sure, it has to do with the god of war, but it also has to do with your own self-expression, healthy competitive drive, right? It has to do with gaining energy and momentum. And it's interesting because when you combine that with September, you really have that vision, that growth, that start of the new action. And then October, about going through breaking these bonds and figuring out what isn't aligned, is all about course correction. And when you go into course correction, you don't have to make things good, bad, right, or wrong. It can just be, this isn't for me anymore, or this isn't who I am anymore. Course correct, take different action, see what it is that's starting to come to fruition. Look at those synchronicities. And when you start ending attachments, come from love always. It doesn't need to be anger and forceful, although anger is a good emotion, but it depends on how we use it. We use anger for motivation for change. You can use that anger of a situation without taking the anger out on people. Very important to know the difference. Soften your body, soften your heart. Come from the highest form of love that you can in these moments. And it can be really hard if you are dealing with anger and conflict. But how can you come from more love within this? I truly believe that love is always the answer. So you might have periods of anger, but then you can come back to your heart center and figure out what it is that you need to do for yourself, how you can choose yourself deeper. And know that when you do that, there will be endless opportunities. You have the freedom to choose. If you find yourself in cycles of indecision, you will feel like you are stuck in a loop. You will feel almost suffocated at times where you don't know which way to turn. And sometimes you're asking like 1,000 people for their advice instead of just listening, tuning into your body and listening. And that's what I would do as an internal person. But if you're an extroverted person, sometimes with these opportunities, you can look outwards and say or ask, what is needed? What are the people around me looking for? What am I inspired most by? There are options and opportunities coming for you that you may not have even noticed, but they are there. So you need to choose opportunity. And because we're in a time where we have so much free will to choose, I mean, we always have, but there's just so much more freedom at this point in time. But sometimes we allow our limitations to take over what we perceive our limitations to be or what is possible for us. Or because of fear. And we feel unfulfilled about that. So when you come into your heart, when you come into that sense of love, when you come from your level of integrity, your choices are never wrong. Even if they end up being what you consider a mistake, you've still learned something. But you'll notice if it's a pattern, if it's the same choices you're making with the same outcome and you still choose it, right? But again, coming from integrity, your heart space, breaking those bonds, finding what isn't aligned and start course correcting when it comes to your action. Because believe me, you cannot manifest anything without taking action. There's some level of action needed. Things aren't going to fall into your lap, although it might seem like they do, because you'd already been taking action in other ways. And sometimes those actions are very unrelated, or so it seems. But it's not really. Any action we take is not unrelated to all aspects of our life. And the reason being is because every action we take, unless it's fully in our comfort zone, is going to change our frequency no matter what. But you have to do it more than once for it to change your frequency. You can't do something one time and be like, yay, I'm forever changed, right? Even for me, taking supplements, I usually take them for a few weeks to start feeling the effects, right? I won't take a supplement one time and be like, woohoo, that's it. One supplement, one time, and I'm cured. And not that I believe supplements cure necessarily. They can help us fine tune our health, but that's another story for another time. So onwards to November. It's all about us coming into a winter season, okay? So even if you're an external or internal, this will always ring true. And sure, we should always be doing this, but I find around November is the time where we really start nourishing yourself, where you really start to care for your body, mind, and soul, where you give yourself that graciousness and tenderness, where we take more time for rest. And for some people, there might be more inspiration, might be more creativity, but it's still having the focus of taking care of yourself. And I'm always an advocate for making sure you do this all year round, but we still go through seasons of needing more rest, more care. And usually winter is the perfect time for that, with the shorter days, with the change in season. If you're in a place on the earth where there are more changes, where there is a drastic drop in temperature and where there is less light, But regardless of where you are on the planet, make sure that during November, it's all about your nourishment. How can you nourish your body, mind, and soul? How can you take better care of yourself? Reassess your daily routine. Does that still apply? Does that need to shift and change? We often get complacent. We find something that works and we'll stick to it, even when it no longer does, or when it no longer represents where we are. I have daily rituals that I do, but they change through the seasons. They're greatly different depending on the time of the year, the cycle of my seasons, my natural rhythms and cycles of the month as well. And as you take care of your body, mind, and soul, you really get to decide. So September, I've realized what I wanted to step into. October, I started to course correct and start to realize more of what's coming, more opportunities. And around November, as you take care of yourself and you start realizing what's manifesting, you get to decide, is this how I want to live? Is this representing my full vision? And if it's not, again, you can course correct even more. But you can continue stepping into the optimal version of who you are. There is no dream that is too big. Be creative. I know it's a rest time, but you can still be creative because we're creative beings no matter what we do. So you get to sow the seeds of the reality that you want to experience. So over the last couple of months, that should be 8 weeks so far, and you will definitely start seeing the changes of what you've been acting on. And I've noticed I've seen big changes within about 3 months. But you'll notice synchronicities well before that. So once you start seeing like the big result of what you've been doing, you get to say, okay, is this in alignment? You get to overcome more fear because at this point you start seeing more of the fruition of your actions. And because you're stepping out of your comfort zone, this can be terrifying, which is why that rest, nourishment, and tenderness is so important. And also discipline. Remember to be disciplined in your actions and in what you are doing. Because at the slight chance that you become uncomfortable, you're like, oh, this is not in alignment. That is a lack of discipline, really. That is where you're taking a feeling and making it mean something more than it does, stopping you from going for what you really, really want. And I've done this so many times where something made me uncomfortable, so I would just run from it. Like, for example, recently I had a very, very, very difficult in-person conversation. It took everything in my whole being to not cancel because I knew I had to do it. I had to fix it, but it made me very uncomfortable. And I was expecting it to go a certain way and that it didn't. It actually did not. So I made up all these stories in my head about what was going to happen. So I could have made it mean to myself that, oh, I'm feeling bad. I'm feeling uncomfortable. So this just shouldn't happen. I'm just going to cancel. Or you can actually face the hard things. You can have the discipline to follow through on your word and your integrity. Because otherwise, what we do is run from everything that feels uncomfortable. And do we grow from that state? No, we do not. If you're constantly running because something doesn't feel good in your system, it doesn't mean that it is wrong. Sometimes there's wounding that is there that needs to be addressed. Anytime you're uncomfortable, there's something that needs to be faced. So you can journal on that if you're feeling uncomfortable. And get to the real root of what it is. But usually the misalignments are different. There's been times where things have felt so good in my body and it was a complete misalignment because it was repeating a pattern that I didn't realize. And it didn't take very long to see. It took about, 4 or 5 months to fully see it. But in relativity, that is a short amount of time. Whereas before, it might have taken me years. So not everything that feels good is meant for you, and not everything that feels bad is misaligned. So just remember that, because we often live in a society where everything just has to feel good to be good. And that is so far from the truth, because a lot of us have so many internal fears and woundings that will keep us from facing the things that we need to. And if we're getting out of our comfort zone, is that going to feel comfortable? If it felt comfortable, you're not going out of your comfort zone. You're not challenging anything if it just feels good all the time. When we're making major leaps in growth, when we're taking major big actions that change our frequency, it will rarely feel good, okay? Because you're changing your perception of who you think you are. And I do that with myself about every 4 months. And over the last 4 or 5 months, I've been taking a lot of actions that make me so uncomfortable, that actually have a lot of fear instilled in them. But I've been doing them anyway and facing it, because I know the only way out is through. So that is the next 3 months to consider. And I really hope this helps you through that time. And I'm excited to do the December, January, February months once we hit November. So of course, tune back for the next 3 months when it hits November. Beginning of November, I'll have that out. I love doing these collective readings. So I hope that gave you some insight on what things to look at, what sort of things to expect collectively during that time, what to really start to narrow down into, because it really does feel like so many are coming into another creative phase, another manifestation phase, because we go through them every 3 to 6 months. So we do manifest big things at least 3 times a year minimum, which takes growth. And if you're not manifesting that amount of times a year, I mean, sure, everyone has a choice on what they do, but really look at if you are challenging yourself or not. If you feel stuck in the same loops in the same place, if you feel the same a year from now and nothing has changed, that is something to look at. Just lovingly, non-judgmentally taking a look at what are you doing to challenge your comfort zones? What are you doing differently? So I hope you enjoy September, October, November. It's full of introspection, reflection, and action. So I'll be very curious to hear from you on how this goes for you. And of course, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to comment or email me at trinitysage333@gmail.com. And I'll catch you on the next episode.